Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Project Slave 1. In the last episode, you'll have seen me make a start on my studio scale model of Boba Fett's ship from The Empire Strikes Back, Slave 1. Studio scale is a loose term which doesn't refer to a specific scale. It refers more to the creation of a model of a suitable size for filming. Quite often these models are fairly large and measured in feet rather than inches. In this case, my model of Slave 1 is in 1:34 scale and will be over 2 feet long and 2 feet wide. This is pretty close to the size of the actual model used in The Empire Strikes Back. Of course, the main advantage in making a large-scale model is that the detail is far easier to recreate, and additional detail can easily be added. All of the main parts have already been 3D printed over several weeks, and now comes the process of putting it all together. I made a pretty good start in episode 1, becoming familiar with supergluing the large chunks of ABS together that make up Slave 1. The 3D model I bought online is pretty good, but I'm planning to take it to the next level, so all the detail is getting removed, ready for scratch building. This section of the lower hull needs filling and sanding before I start on the surface detail. But first I need to build up the lower edge to remove the chamfer and create a sharp profile. This is a spare print and you can see the area I need to build up. To do this, I'm going to use some ABS filament from my 3D printer. It's fairly rigid, so I need to pre-bend it roughly to shape so that it stays in place better while the glue sets. After liberal doses of superglue and a couple of hours, it's set in place and is ready to be filed back down. And here it is. It was quite easy to do and well worth the effort. I think the lower hull on the original studio model is thinner than this and was probably made from fiberglass, but that's okay. My philosophy for this project is to make a model spaceship based on the movie, not a model of a model. In other words, try and give the model a degree of engineering credibility, while still maintaining and hopefully enhancing the character of Boba Fett's Slave 1. The area marked out in red is going to be cut out to make way for the cockpit. It's going to need some major surgery, but I'm confident the patient will live. This is where we're at so far. By the end of the episode, we'll have all of the major parts assembled. That's the easy part. The problem is I want to add a detailed, credible cockpit. Slave 1's cockpit is a bit odd. It's in one position for landing and rotates to another position for flight. To make way for the cockpit unit that I'm proposing, I need to extensively hollow out the body of Slave 1. Together with the rear section, these parts all need material cutting out. I've had to plan this carefully as I still need the parts to fit together to create a strong shell. At least if I screw up I can print the parts out again. After a nervous half hour, this is what I've got. The ABS parts have a thin shell and a honeycomb inside, so cut up fairly well, even though the process does make quite a mess. I used one of these vibrating saw things, which went through everything like a knife through butter. I cut out less than I needed, so that I could trim back carefully with my Dremel later. This is roughly how the parts will go together. You can see how I now have quite a cavity for the new cockpit to fit into. It may look like I have a plan, but at this stage I'm just making it up as I go along. Sometimes too much planning can stop you getting started on a project. You just need to get stuck in and get on with it. The back of the hull had a lot of material removed, but it lost none of its strength. I think using superglue was a good move, far better than using regular solvents for this size of build. I assembled the front section in 2 halves, so that I could rework and tidy up the interior. It also helped me plan the interior layout, having something tangible in front of me. As you can see, there are still plenty of fixing tab locations to join the 2 halves together, so it should be strong enough. Amazingly, after all that hacking and gluing, it lines up surprisingly well with the rear lower hull. Now I just have to assemble the tail. This hull tail part was the largest 3D print of the build, and printed perfectly. I've already filed off all the detail, and where there are holes I filled the interior with milliput to provide a base for the outer coat of filler, which will go on later. These parts easily go together using the tabs, and just need some truing up with a file. all the detail will go, especially as the main components need to be blended together, before the detail can then be reinstated. I can now mock up the 3 main sections of Slave 1. The front halves are now glued together, and I've also added a length of filament to correct the bottom edge. This still needs to be filed back down once the superglue is fully cured. Where there were holes in the shell or thin areas, I've added milliput to the inside of the body. The tail section's now been glued together and easily plugs on. These 2 parts now fit onto the rear lower hull. Now you can start to see the distinctive shape of Slave 1. I'm not gluing these parts together for a while yet, as there are still some areas that I need to get to so that I can add the detail. The first of those is the cockpit. I designed the basic cockpit shell in my CAD software so that it could be 3D printed. I decided to go down this route rather than build it from styrene, as it was going to get a lot of handling and I needed it to be strong and square. I'll be going into the details of the cockpit in the next episode, so make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon to catch it when it goes live. It was a straightforward part to 3D print, but its size meant it still took over a day to print. I deliberately didn't design it to have any detail, as it would get lost in the cleaning up, and I could better add it later from strip and sheet styrene. And here it is after some sanding to get rid of the layer lines. It's a decent sized unit, so there'll be plenty of scope for detailing it up later. With a bit more trimming of the front section, the cockpit unit neatly fits into place, and you can see where the 2 deck levels will be. The semicircular cutout will be where the rotating section of the cockpit will go. My cockpit won't rotate, it'll just be static. Making it rotate would just cause chaos when the cockpit is finished and sealed up with a canopy. Let's take a look at all the parts assembled with the cockpit unit in place. It is quite an imposing model, being now at its full length. When the wings go on, it'll be just as wide as it is long. With Slave 1 at this stage, I have a good opportunity to check the 3D model out and see how close it is to the real studio model. The alignment along the spine of the front and tail sections isn't quite right yet, but that should be fairly easily fixed with some filling and filing. I thought I'd check the model against my line drawing just to see if there were any glaring errors. I took a photo square onto the side with a long lens to try and get an image without any perspective, and then overlaid the line drawing. I know this isn't totally accurate, but it would give me a good guide to identify any problem areas. I was pleasantly surprised, but quickly saw an area I wasn't happy with: the nose and the cockpit sides. The top of the nose should slope down rather than being horizontal, and the cockpit sides should be lower. The matte painting of Slave 1 from The Empire Strikes Back supported this. While the matte painting could be questioned, I figured it at least reflected the character of Slave 1 better than my model. So, I marked out where I wanted to remove material from the front section with a marker pen. Angling the front was easy enough, but lowering the cockpit sides was a bit more complicated. As the sides came down, the cockpit would get wider, and although this wasn't a problem, it would start to look odd if I went too far. I think the overall geometry of the 3D model must be slightly out. It's certainly very close. I'll just have to judge for myself how far I go. So, after half an hour with the Dremel, this is where I'm at. The sides are lower and the nose now has the correct angle. Of course, all this cutting of the nose has gone through the outer layers of the 3D prints, exposing the core, but I can fill that with milliput. The cockpit still fits, but I'll now have to design a new canopy and a means of attaching it to the body. After a lot of filling, filing and sanding, it looks a lot better. The canopy opening is now tapered slightly, being wider at the bottom than at the top, so I'll have to come up with a fixing design to tidy that up and attach the canopy. That can wait till the next episode, but in the meantime, let's check out the new improved version. And here we have the before and after. I think it looks a lot better with the changes. It certainly is an improvement. I'm not sure how close it is to the studio model, but I'm happy to go with the result. The nose now looks more aggressive and is in character with the movie Slave 1. This technique of resculpting to get the character of a model right is something I'm very familiar with. I've been using it for over 20 years to create my range of pewter aircraft models. You just have to learn to be your own critic, work out where the problem is, and then tackle it. I knew from the very beginning that the 3D prints were just the starting point for me to recreate Slave 1. I've made a good start, and there's still a lot of tweaking to do. I think the main body is about 90% there. I may tweak the nose a bit more. The junction of the spine needs to be resolved, and I need to check the angle of the entry hatch and the end of the tail. But these are all minor points. So far it looks good, and in the next episode I'll work on the cockpit. That'll be a lot of fun, not least because there are very few rules. Once I've worked out the geometry for the rotating cockpit, it's just a matter of detailing it up in the style of the movie using old school styrene. I hope you're enjoying Project Slave 1. If you are, please share with your friends and make sure you subscribe to my channel. So you catch my next video when it goes live, click on the bell icon. As you can see from my channel, I always have lots of projects going on, which I hope you'll find interesting. These range from my Staples and Vine models, featured in Sarah's vlog, to short projects and my popular how-to series. If you have any questions about Project Slave 1, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.